Good morning from Hunt City Congregational Christian Church, June 11th, 2023. I want to talk today about jealousy. Before we get into that, did you see, I'm not a big fan of college women's softball unless I know somebody who's playing, but I couldn't help but be impressed by the young ladies from Oklahoma who won, I think, their third national championship in a row. And I listened to some of those young ladies interviewed talking about their faith and was just really impressed with their maturity and talking about how, you can be happy if you win a game or sad if you lose a game, but the joy of the Lord, no one can take from us. And the girls that I saw interviewed, I was just very impressed. So congratulations to Oklahoma. I want to look today at some verses in 1 Samuel chapter 18. I'm not going to read the entire chapter. I'm going to read some selected verses. The church will be reading the whole chapter, but for sake of brevity on here, we're going to cut out a few of the verses. But I encourage you to read the whole chapter, 1 Samuel 18, and talk about jealousy. Jealousy. First, it talks about Saul's son Jonathan and his relationship with David. Now, when he had finished speaking to Saul, the soul of Jonathan was knit to the soul of David, and Jonathan loved him as his own soul. Saul took him that day, David, would not let him go home to his father's house anymore. Then Jonathan and David made a covenant because he loved him as his own soul. And then in verse 5, it says, David went out wherever Saul sent him and behaved wisely. And Saul set him over the men of war. And he was accepted in the sight of all of the people and also in the sight of Saul's servants. Now it happened as they were coming home, when David was returning from the slaughter of the Philistine, that the women had come out of all the cities of Israel singing and dancing to meet King Saul with tambourines, with joy, and with musical instruments. So the women sang as they danced, Saul has slain his thousands and David his 10,000s. Then Saul was very angry, and the saying displeased him. And he said, they have ascribed to David 10,000s, and to me they have ascribed only thousands. Now what more can he have but the kingdom? So Saul eyed David from that day forward. And it happened the next day that the distressing spirit from the Lord came upon Saul, and he prophesied inside the house. So David played music with his hand as at other times, but there was a spear in Saul's hand. And Saul cast the spear, for he said, I will pin David to the wall. But David escaped his presence twice. Now Saul was afraid of David because the Lord was with him, but he had departed from Saul. Verse 14, David behaved wisely in all his ways, and the Lord was with him. And then Saul says in verse 17, let my hand not be against him, but let the hand of the Philistines be against him. On down to verse 28, thus Saul saw and knew that the Lord was with David, and that Michal, Saul's daughter, loved him. And Saul was still more afraid of David, so Saul became David's enemy continually. And then the last verse again there, the 30th verse, says, David behaved more wisely than all the servants of Saul, so that his name became highly esteemed. Jealousy. Can you think of a time in the Bible where jealousy came into play? Well, I think of Jacob and Esau. There was jealousy there. Jacob was jealous because Esau was the firstborn and Jacob swindled him out of his birthright. I think of Sarah and Hagar, her handmaid, who she gave to Abraham. Sarah took upon herself to fulfill God's promise that they would have a son, and she had her handmaiden go into Abraham, and she conceived, had Ishmael. And then Sarah was jealous, resentful of Hagar because she was a mother, Sarah was not. I think of Jesus' disciples, James and John's request, wanting to sit at the right and the left hand of Jesus, and how the other disciples perceived that. I think there was some competition, some jealousy at times between the disciples. God himself is jealous. In Exodus 34:14, God said, you shall worship no other God, little g, for the Lord, whose name is jealous, and that has a capital J, is a jealous God. Exodus 34:14. God is jealous when his glory and his honor and his praise go to someone or something else. He's jealous when we give his time, his resources, his praise, his worship to someone or something else. Have you ever made God jealous? That's something that I've never really considered until I reread this passage. Have I ever done anything that would make God jealous? Have I given praise or glorified anything else other than God to the point where God was jealous because he alone is worthy of our worship? Now, if jealousy is something that God experiences and we're made in God's image, then we have jealousy in us. There's a godly jealousy, I think, when we see someone or something receiving something that should be due to God, we should have a righteous jealousy, just like there's a righteous anger. But when we see sin, when we see people victimized, but the jealousy that we experience in the flesh, the anger that we experience in the flesh tend not to be righteous. Okay, the jealousy we experience is not a godly jealousy. Billy Joe, my wife, I got to tell these two stories on her because they've just stuck with me over the years. We love each other very much, and I don't think she would mind me sharing this, but when I was in college, I went to a homecoming dance with a girl. We had a picture taken. After we got married, Joe found that picture and she cut the other girl out of the picture so that it was me alone in the picture. I think she was a little bit jealous of that young lady. Another time after we had been married for a couple of years, she had a dream that I was unfaithful to her. And she woke up and was mad at me because of this dream. She was jealous that I would give any affection that a husband should give to his wife to someone else. So even though it was a dream, she experienced some jealousy with that. And I have too. We all have, if we're honest. I get jealous at work. We have some men at work, sometimes ladies, but usually it's the men who get to play in golf outings to represent the bank. We have some guys that have already played in 6 or 8 golf events this year, and I haven't been able to. I'm jealous because while I have to stay and work, they're out enjoying playing golf, being outdoors, and meeting people. I comfort myself with the belief that I am so valuable that I cannot be out playing golf and missing work because the bank needs me that much. I say that tongue in cheek, okay? And there are some things that our employees do. Banks get recognition for something called CRA, the Community Reinvestment Act, and there are certain things, community service things that if I do them, the bank gets credit. It looks favorable for the bank when examiners come in and examine our Community Reinvestment Act resources. What have we done? What have we done? And often the bank will put pictures of an employee on who was recognized for doing something, some kind of community service. And I'm not really jealous of them, but of the process, because many of the things that ordinarily you would do that you would consider community service or charitable are not considered such by the CRA, by the Community Reinvestment Act. So I've been jealous of the process. It's like the things that I have done don't count towards this, but these other selected things do. And sometimes I'm jealous of the employee getting the recognition. That's totally wrong. That's totally wrong. I should be happy for them that they're receiving recognition. So even at my advanced age, I still deal with jealousy. Back to the scripture, Saul's son Jonathan and David became the best of friends. It says their souls were knit together. And Jonathan loved David so much, they made a covenant, an agreement. They entered into a friend relationship, a bond, a covenant, an agreement that they would remain friends no matter what. And if anyone had reason to be jealous, it would be Jonathan, who was the firstborn son of King Saul. He would be the heir to the throne normally. But Jonathan knew that David had been anointed king by Samuel and would someday become king of Israel. And yet, Jonathan was not jealous of David. And isn't that something? Doesn't that tell us a lot about Jonathan? David's behavior in general and towards King Saul was wise. It says that in 3 verses in that chapter that David behaved wisely. It says is it 1 Samuel 18:5, 14 and 30, he behaved wisely. And it says he was highly esteemed by the people. Could there be a lesson there for us? If we behave wisely, we will be highly esteemed. So after David had killed Goliath and they had defeated the Philistines, they're marching back home through various cities in Israel. And it tells us that the women of the villages and cities came out to sing with musical instruments, with tambourines. And they sang with joy. And it said, one of the things they sang was, Saul has killed his thousands and David his 10,000s. And Saul was jealous. He became angry. He says, they credit David with 10,000 and me with only 1,000. Verse 9 says, Saul eyed David from that day forward. Somebody ever eye you? Okay. He was suspicious of David from that day forward. Something else we can get from this passage is that the distressing spirit from the Lord again came upon Saul and he prophesied. But he didn't prophesy for God. He was prophesying at the behest of this evil spirit. David was devoted to the king. He played the harp again to try to soothe Saul as he had done in times past. And so then how did Saul react? Saul threw a spear to kill David, but he missed him. The distressing spirit that Saul had didn't make him do it, but it prompted him to do it. It put the idea in his head. And in verse 12 says, God was with David, and Saul recognized this. Saul recognized that God's spirit was no longer with him. Eventually, Saul says, I don't need to kill him. I'll let the Philistines do it. He offered David one of his daughters. So Saul gave Michal, not the first daughter, but another daughter, Michal, to David to be his wife. Saul set David on an assignment to kill Philistines. He killed 200. He did what Saul commanded. Saul was hopeful that the Philistines would kill David and he wouldn't have to do it himself or try to himself. And Saul knew that the Lord was with David. David's name became highly esteemed because he was a hero. People looked up to him. And remember, 15 years approximately from the time that David was anointed king until he would accept the role, ascend to the throne. Again, if Jonathan knew that David would be king and Jonathan was his firstborn, Jonathan was the one who we think would be jealous, but yet he was not. But Saul was jealous of David. Jonathan and David's friendship that they made would prove to be above jealousy and ambition. They loved each other more than the throne or more than power. David behaved wisely. The praise of the people didn't give him a big head. Success didn't give him a big head. He remained humble. David said at one point, who am I that I should be the son-in-law of the king? David just viewed himself as the shepherd boy. He esteemed himself lower than others. Reminds me of Psalm chapter 8 that says, what is man that you are mindful of him? As David speaks to God. What is man that you're mindful of him? Is there a correlation between David's humble spirit and his wise behavior? I think there is. I think if we remain humble before the Lord and if we ask, as it says in James, it says, if there's anyone who lacks wisdom, let them ask, and God will give it. The Bible says that's one thing that God will give us. He may say no to some of our prayers, but if we ask for wisdom, he will give it. And certainly David was behaving wisely. We know that he would fail later on. Jealousy. Let's talk about jealousy one more time. You know what? Sometimes I think pastors are a little bit jealous of one another. We may not admit it, but someone who has a bigger congregation, a nicer facility, more active in the community, a church that's just more naturally attractive to people than your church. And I think this plays on us, and I think the devil uses that to teach us. I think he used it to teach us. We had a pastor one time at the church where I grew up, but we had a number of kids, like most small country churches, that were growing up, going to college, and they were resettling in other places because of the lack of opportunities around this area. And They were joining other churches. And the pastor at the time said, look, it's a victory if they're somewhere serving the Lord. What we're doing here is preparing people to send out. And if they go and serve somewhere else, it's a win for the kingdom. And I thought, what a great attitude, what a great thought that is about us, particularly as small churches like ours, preparing our young people, raising them up, preparing them to send them out so that they will serve the Lord wherever they are. Don't let jealousy, that green-eyed monster, overtake your life. If you are experiencing jealousy, ask yourself why, and ask God why, and ask Him to help you with it, and He will. God bless you. Read 1 Samuel 18. It's a great chapter. Read the whole chapter. I left some things out. Have a great week.